Good evening. Good to see everybody this evening. Good to have our visitors with us, as always. Glad the rain let up a little bit so we get in partially dry. But good to be here. Good to be here this evening. We'll begin a word of prayer. Brandon, would you lead some prayer? We're going to be in Psalms 139 tonight. And there's three things about God that the Bible tells us. It tells us about the omniscience of God, that is all-knowing. It tells us about the omnipresence of God, that He's all-present. And the omnipotence of God being all-powerful. And Psalms 139 tells us about the first two. Elsewhere in the Bible, you find all three of them, but David is trying to show us about God, tell us about God. And we have a limited understanding when it comes to God. And without the Bible, we would know very little about God. And even with the Bible, sometimes we struggle trying to understand things of the Bible about God. And we'll never know everything, at least on this side of life. Maybe in the next life, when we get to heaven, there we'll know more about God, and questions we'll have will be answered. But David is trying to give us things here to help us understand about the all-knowing, the all-present, the all-powerful part of God. And the first thing that David wants us to know about Him, at least the all-knowing part of God, is that in Matthew 10 and verse 30, here Christ says, "But the very hairs of your head are all numbered." Now, that's something that we don't know. We have no idea how many hairs are on our head. For some, it's more than others, but God is not telling us this, just wanting us to know that He knows how many hairs we have on our head. He's trying to tell us this, to tell us that He knows everything about us. He created us. Everything we need, we think we know about ourselves, God knows even more. And when it comes to the very hairs of our head, He wants us to know, I know you. I know you inside and out. I know you better than your parents know you. I know you better than your spouse knows you. I know you better than anyone else. I am your creator. And that's one thing that the Lord is trying to get over to us. And then we see in Psalms 139 and verse 1, He says, "O Lord, you have searched me and known me." The first 6 verses of Psalms 139, God is telling us this, that He knows all things. And He certainly does. And He knows everything about us. And He knows everything about all of us at the same time. It's not like He's got a group here or individual here, then I got to wait and shift over here. All of us at the same time. That's the all-knowing power of God. He knows that. And in Jeremiah 17:10, "I, the Lord, search the heart. I test the mind, even to give every man according to his ways, according to the fruit of his doings." So God knows us best. Who else in the world knows us like God? And the answer certainly is no one knows us as He does. He knows every good thing about us. He knows every bad thing about us. He encourages us to do better. He encourages us to turn away from the evil that maybe we'll be presented with in temptation or whatever it may be. He knows us. He knows how to help us. And that's the omnipotence there of God. In Psalms 139 and verse 2, you know my sitting down and my rising up. You understand my thought afar off. God knows David, and David knows that God knows him. And David knows that. David knows that every thought God knows. And that's pretty impressive, that God knows our thoughts. And that's why we got to watch our thoughts, do our very best to keep our thoughts pure, holy, as God will want us to. When our thoughts begin to go in places they shouldn't go, we need to recognize that and bring them back in. So we won't act on those thoughts, but God knows our very thoughts. He knows our thoughts from years ago. That's the all-knowing God from years ago. And years to come. That's what the all-knowing God's about. And that's why we need to watch our thoughts and keep them in the right frame of mind and keep them where God will want them to be. In verse 6, Psalms 139, such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high. I cannot attain it. If you try to comprehend that, what God has just told us, how He knows us inside and out, even my very thoughts, it's hard to take that in, hard to understand. How could somebody, and I'm putting God in a somebody category, which He really isn't, but how could someone know this much about us? And we think about it, it should make us feel good to know that God knows this much about us. Our friends don't know these things about us. Our family don't know these things about us, our very thoughts, but God does. And that puts God greater than any of us. He knows these things. And He's not trying to scare us to think, oh no, God knows my very thoughts, and what am I going to do? He's not trying to do that or scare us. He just wants us to know He knows everything about us. And He certainly does. He knows the good. He knows the bad. He even knows the ugly. If the ugly's there, He knows all of that. So God is all-knowing. He knows it all about us. And David is trying to get that across in the first 6 verses. Help us to understand who God is. And then in verse 7, David begins to tell us about the omnipresence of God. Where can I go from your spirit, or where can I flee from your presence? If He's everywhere at the same time, there's nowhere. The answer is nowhere that we can flee from Him. As Matthew 6 and verse 9 says, and in this manner, therefore pray, our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Well, I thought God was in heaven. Well, He is. That's where He is. That's His home. That's where He dwells. But He's also everywhere else as well. That's how God operates. David's trying to get across to us, there's not a place that we can get away from Him. We're always in His presence. Jonah tried to get away from Him. He fled to Tarshish, tried to, and we know the story. It didn't work out for him. He tried to flee from his responsibilities and that God gave him, and it didn't work. Again, we're not going to ever will we ever be able to flee from Him. His presence is always with us. Then in verse 8, he goes into more detail. If I ascend into heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, you are there. And we know God is in heaven. The Bible tells us that. What does it mean by hell here? Well, the Hebrew word means the grave. When I go to the grave, and eventually we all will, God knows it. He knows that about us. So, what we know about God, He knows everything about us. From the very beginning to our very end, He knows this. Verse 9. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea. Wings of the morning. Talking about the sunrise. He knows our very getting up. He knows everything about us when we do. Othermost parts of the sea. If we were to go to the very bottom, the depths of the ocean, God knows we're there as well. He's there. We're not going to be able to escape from His presence. So God knows it. Wherever we may travel, whatever we may do, we're not going to get away from His presence. In verse 11, if I say, surely the darkness shall fall on me, even the night shall be light about me. Indeed, the darkness shall not hide from you, but the night shines as the day. The darkness and the light are both alike to you. David wants us to know that even in the darkest of the dark, and we've probably all been in places where you couldn't see your hand in front of your face, David wants us to know God's there. He's there as well. And you can't hide from Him in the dark. There's no escaping even in darkness, you might say. You know, there's a lot of crime that happens at night. It's because really you can't see. But when it comes to God, He can see. He knows exactly what's going on. He shines in the day. He shines at night. Again, there's no hiding place that we can hide from God, even in those dark places we might think about. So don't try to hide from Him. He's there wherever you may go. Verse 13 through 15. For you formed my inward parts, you covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret and skillfully wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Even when we were being formed in the womb, God knew us. He knew about us. In those early stages, maybe even before an infant has the development of the brain, God knows about that infant. As that infant develops and grows and eventually is born, God's there from day one. That's how early He's with us. That again, from the time of our conception to the time of our death, God is with us. Not a moment that He's not there. And God has that perfect knowledge of who we are even from day one. We have that. So God is thinking about us even as we are little babies before even our birth. And then here's David's conclusion to this, things he wants us to know about the presence of God and the knowledge of God. He says, how precious also are your thoughts to me, O God. How great is the sum of them. If I should count them, they would be more in number than the sand. When I awake, I am still with you. God thinks about us. You know, we have times when we think about other individuals. It may be sometimes our children. We always think about our children, no matter how old they get. And our grandchildren, no matter how old they get, they're on our mind. We think about them a lot. Well, God thinks about us a lot. So much that it outnumbers the sand of the sea. And that's a lot. Each individual, He's thinking about us on a constant basis. Thinking about us. How do you go about numbering that? You can't number it. There's no way. But God is still thinking about us. Whatever situation we find ourselves in, whatever we're doing, whatever difficult times or good times, we're on God's mind. All of us at the same time. It's not like He picks one here and one next day. At the same time, every individual on the face of this earth, or how many billions of people they are, God's thinking about them. And again, that's hard to fathom. Hard to get that down. But yet we're talking about God. And David's trying to get that across to us. We are special to God. We're special. Very special. And then verse 19 and 20. Oh, that you would slay the wicked, O God, depart from me. Therefore, you bloodthirsty men, for they speak against you wickedly. Your enemies take your name in vain. We know this about God, how great He is. His knowledge, His presence, His power, the very thought that He has, I'm thinking of all of us at the same time. How could it be that you have some of those who are wicked, who would deny this, who would say, no, there's no way. There's no way that could be. How can they say that? How can you have individuals, like in verse 20, individuals who take the Lord's name in vain? And there's many ways to do that. But there's one way I think of most often, someone takes God's name in vain. How could they do that knowing that this is God, who knows their every thoughts, who knows their every action? The very God who's going to raise them in their judgment, they will stand before them, for Him. How could they curse the name of God or use His name in a vain way? How could they do that? But they do. There are people who simply have no respect for God. No respect. Even though they may have a belief in God, they have no respect for God. Everything about God is vain to them. Never do they think about Him. So yeah, He has enemies. Just as any Christian would have enemies. But God has a lot of them. But they're nothing compared to God. Nothing. And God much greater than they are. And then in verse 21 and 22. Do I not hate them, O Lord, who you hate? And do I not loathe those who rise up against you? I hate them with perfect hatred. I count them my enemies. Does it anger you when you hear individuals who are against God, who deny His existence, who would say, I would never serve a God like that. I would never do this or that for a God who's so mean, who's always angry, who's always waiting for you to make a mistake and punish you. Again, that's how some people view God, but that's not the view of God that we should have. And that's not the God we find in the Bible. But yet there's some things that we are to hate. He's not talking here about the individual. He's talking about their actions. Their actions are to be hated. We wouldn't approve of their actions, and we wouldn't approve of their words, and the influence certainly. And it seems that in the system of today, we find more and more hatred toward God, more and more turning against His word. And again, we don't hate the individual, but the actions. And again, people have a hard time of distinction between the two. But God certainly can. There's no hatred there for the person. It's hatred for the actions that are taking place. And that's where he's coming from there in verse 21 and 22. And we are to hate things that God hates. Hate the injustice. Hate the immorality. Hate everything that, the meanness in the world. Hate that. And then in 23 and 24, he says, search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my anxieties. And see if there is any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. So David is wanting God to help him. Search me, God, and tell me where I need to do better. If there's any wicked bone in me, get it out. And this is a prayer, you might say, that David is doing, giving to God. Do we want God to search us? Do we want God to try us? But we should, if it makes us better. Do we want God to tell us where we're falling short, where we need to improve? Do we want to know? Well, we always say yes, but sometimes I don't know if we're really honest about that or not, if we really want to know. Sometimes people will say, do you want me to tell you the truth? What do we say? Well, yeah. And when they do, what do? We get mad. We may never speak to them again. But again, you have no better friend than the friend who will tell you truth. No better friend. And many times when it happens, well, again, we turn against them, get mad, never want to speak to them again. We shouldn't be that way. If they're a true friend, they will tell us the truth. And we'll listen and examine ourselves to see if that ain't true to it. Maybe I do need to change. Again, that's what David is telling us here about God. He said, God, I know you know me. I want you to try me. I want you to make me better. If there's anything that I need to improve, any wickedness that's there, get it out of me so that I can be better when it comes to my journey and my journey there getting to heaven one day. So there's David telling us about God. How great he is, his knowledge, his presence everywhere, his power. Telling us those things about him. And sometimes these things can just be overwhelming when we try to figure them out ourselves. And really we need God's help to help us. And we'll never fully understand him. But get to heaven, maybe then we can ask our questions, have answers. That's where we want to end up when this life is over. Anything on Psalms 139? All right, we'll conclude here a couple minutes early, but we'll stop here and take up another topic next Wednesday night.